Hi everyone, this is D-Keys, bringing you an updated build guide for the Scepter-Hammer Elementalist in PvE following the September 2014 feature pack. While Elementalists were hit rather hard with that Conjure Fiery Greatsword nerf, Elementalists are still very strong in dungeoning group situations because they provide very high DPS even without Fiery Greatsword, on top of maintaining exceptionally high levels of might and permanent fury. No other class can maintain such levels of might and fury with ease. Scepter-Conjure Elementalists have a variety of builds that can be useful in different situations. The base build that I would still recommend for most PvE is a 6-6-2-0-0 trait distribution. In Fire, your first major trait will be Burning Precision so that you can apply burning to enemies on critical attacks. The second minor trait, Sunspot, inflicts damage to nearby enemies when you attune to fire. This is a nice little damage boost to an already powerful rotation. The second trait that you'll take is Pyromancer's Alacrity. Note that I'm not taking Conjurer right now, so since Lightning Hammer will only last about 15 seconds or so, you'll want to take this skill so that your fire field and blast finishers are off cooldown between hammers. The third minor trait, Burning Rage, is a damage modifier that will allow you to do 10% more damage to burning foes. So you want to make sure you have 100% uptime on burning foes for this trait. Finally, take Persisting Flames. This will allow all of your blast finishers in fire fields to grant fury to nearby party members. This will also extend the duration of your fire fields by 2 seconds so that you can blast more might and fury. Now, a couple of tweaks you can do to this trait line are swap out Burning Precision for Internal Fire if the rest of your party has burning covered. Usually in your rotation, you'll stack a few seconds of burning with Dragon's Tooth and your fire field. If your group may be low DPS, or if you're in a particularly long encounter, you may want to swap Pyromancer's Alacrity out for Conjurer. This will extend your charges on your Lightning Hammer or Frostbow or Fiery Greatsword from 15 to 25, enabling you to use that Conjure for longer. This is most important for Lightning Hammer, though it could also be useful for long trash runs with Conjure Fiery Greatsword. In Air, the first major trait, Bolt to the Heart, is another 20% damage modifier when your foe is under 33% health. This will let your Lightning Hammer chain be even more damaging, or your non-Lightning Hammer burst quickly take out an enemy. The second minor trait in Air, Electric Discharge, is another on-swap proccing damage. This one procs on your targeted enemy when you swap to Air. The second major trait, Arcane Lightning, is a bonus of 150 ferocity for 15 seconds after you use an arcane skill. Since you'll usually have 2 arcane skills in your slot skills to use, you can maintain 100% uptime of this trait if you prioritize keeping that trait up, or you can maintain about 60% if you're trying to use all of your available blast finishers in your own fire field. The third minor trait in Air, Weak Spot, enables you to contribute a little bit of vulnerability to your group. For Scepter-Dagger Elementalists on boss enemies, this will be about 2 or 3 vuln. For Scepter-Focus Hammer, this will be more along the lines of 4. Finally, I recommend taking Air Training, which is a 10% damage modifier while attuned to air. That means instead of camping water, as you may be used to, I recommend that you camp air instead. Also, if you happen to have both Internal Fire and Air Training, you'll have a 10% damage modifier up almost all the time. Rotations that use Piercing Shards, which is water camping, usually only have that modifier up 30 to 40% of the time, which means it's actually contributing less to your overall damage in a long battle than using a couple of 10% modifiers. Finally, in Earth, take stone splinters for an easy to maintain 10% damage modifier while in melee range of your target. If your party can maintain 100% Fury uptime without your use of Persisting Flames, I recommend that you take 1 point out of fire and 1 point out of air to go 2 into earth to grab Vital Striking. Going for Persisting Flames is actually a DPS and effective power loss in a lot of builds, so grabbing that 10% modifier by sacrificing a little bit in fire and air can be a DPS boost. Many of the rotations for the 6-6-2 and 5-5-2-2 builds swap between fire and air primarily, only venturing to earth or water if additional blasts are needed. For the Scepter-Dagger with Conjurer rotation, Earthquake is completely ignored because you can fit in a full Lightning Hammer auto attack chain if you don't use it. This has the benefit of you being able to quickly use Lightning Strike and ride the lightning both before and after your Lightning Hammer auto attack chains. This rotation with Conjurer is infinitely repeatable. If you don't dodge during the whole rotation, I would recommend using Lightning Hammer 4, that is Lightning Storm, during your second hammer use at the very end, so that it will be ready for Conjure again once you stack with both fire and earth. That way, you can continue using your lightning hammers throughout the whole battle without any downtime. The Scepter-Focus with Conjurer rotation ventures into both earth and water for the blast finishers in those two attunements, though if you want to slightly boost the DPS of your rotation, instead of using Comet, you can use the 25th charge on your Lightning Hammer for a Lightning Storm as well. This rotation with a Scepter-Focus is a little bit lower DPS than a corresponding Scepter-Dagger rotation, but it will allow you to stack 9 more stacks of might and maintain about 4 to 6 more stacks of might throughout the course of a battle, slightly more if you happen to have strength runes. Note that on each side of your Lightning Hammer auto attacks, I try to use a Lightning Strike for that extra little DPS. Since it's an instant, it is very easy to cast before swapping back to Fire Attunement. Also, I use Arcane Brilliance while in Earth Attunement while using Scepter-Focus, so that I don't have to sit idle in Earth Attunement while using Magnetic Wave. If I want to conjure the Earth Elemental, that is a very convenient time to do so as well. Against bosses, an Elementalist can use Fresh Air to have a slightly higher single target DPS rotation with a Scepter-Dagger. Note that this is actually a lower cleave damage than the standard Conjurer builds and should not be used against groups. The target of this rotation is to use 2 or so Lightning Hammer chains, then swap to water, back to Air Attunement before the 3rd hit of your Lightning Hammer chain, and then over to Earth and back to Air similarly. That way you get a few additional procs from Electric Discharge during the Lightning Hammer portion of your rotation. During your second hammer, use only Water Attunement and then back to Air, saving Earth Attunement for the time between your hammers so that you can use Earthquake for an additional blast finisher. This particular type of rotation does not work very well with a Scepter-Focus because Scepter-Focus has blast finishers in both Water and Earth Attunement, so you don't have a free attunement that you can swap to during Lightning Hammers. For battles under 40 seconds long, you can swap Conjurer out for Pyromancer's Alacrity, which reduces the cooldown on your fire weapon skills. This means that your fire burst skills will be up between each Lightning Hammer. Granted, this also means that if the battle extends past 40 seconds, or if you lose your lightning hammers, then you will be stuck with a very low DPS rotation. For Scepter-Dagger, open up with your Fire Burst and Arcane Brilliance, then swap to air, use Lightning Strike and ride the lightning before conjuring your lightning hammer, then using the 5 auto attack chains and Arcane Wave to deal damage and keep up your Arcane Lightning buff. A Scepter-Focus non-Conjurer rotation is just as good as Scepter-Dagger with the 6-6-2 and 5-5-2-2-0 setups. In Scepter-Focus, completely ignore using Comet because it is a DPS loss. Instead, go through Fire, Earth, and Air using a Lightning Strike before conjuring your Lightning Hammer, and using Arcane Wave to refresh your Arcane Lightning buff when needed. While Scepter-Focus is the superior might stacking set of the two, its DPS is especially low if you are left without any hammers. So choose wisely when determining if you should use Scepter-Dagger or Scepter-Focus for a particular encounter. If using Glyph of Elementals, I recommend that you cast it in Fire Attunement before even might stacking. That way, you can proceed with your rotation uninterrupted. Otherwise, wait until you get to Air Attunement and cast it before conjuring your Lightning Hammer. Using a water camping build is viable for some particular situations. The first, which is just a tweak to your base 6-6 build, is actually a Tempest defense build that is geared towards using Frostbow to quickly burst down an enemy while it is disabled with Frostbow 5. In Fire, take DPS traits as appropriate for your group, and Persisting Flames. In Air, again take Bolt to the Heart and Arcane Lightning, and then for your Grandmaster trait, take Tempest Defense, which is a 20% damage modifier while at striking an enemy that is under the effect of a CC. This includes the Frozen status from Frostbow 5, which lasts for about 5 seconds. Finally, in Water, take Piercing Shards for a 20% damage modifier while a foe has at least 1 stack of vulnerability on them. The idea behind this particular build would be to stack Might in all of your attunements, and then drop Frostbow, Frostbow 5, Frostbow 4, and 3, and then continue with any Scepter Burst that you may have available. If you don't need to swap out of Fire Attunement, then don't. Instead, take Stone Splinters so that you have a 10% damage modifier in Fire times the 10% damage modifier in Earth, which works out to be slightly more DPS, but is harder to pull off if other people can't stack Might. Another build that would use a water camping rotation is the legendary 04550 build. This one is very challenging to play, and I would not recommend it for most groups because it requires a very capable Guardian and other party members to help the Elementalist stay alive without dodging. Your air traits remain the same. In Earth, take Stone Splinters, and then Serrated Stones, which is a 5% damage modifier on bleeding foes. This means that someone else in your party has to be applying that bleeding. The strength of this build comes from a 10% damage modifier that is very hard to maintain. As soon as you dodge, you lose this damage modifier, and your DPS becomes worse than even a 6-6-2 build. In Water, take Vital Striking for a 10% damage modifier while over 90% health, which means if you decide to not dodge and take a hit, you'll likely lose this bonus instead. And then finally, Piercing Shards for that 20% damage modifier while in Water Attunement. An extra little bonus comes from Bountiful Power, which is a 1% damage increase for every boon that you have on you. You'll have at least Might and Fury in any kind of organized group. You may also possibly have Swiftness or Vigor, so you can have easily a 3 to 5% damage modifier from this minor trait. If using 66020, you may take Conjurer and use a traditional water camping Scepter Hammer rotation. If using 04550, you have a very abbreviated rotation. Scepter-Dagger ekes out a few more seconds of DPS before it becomes more or less useless, while Scepter-Focus has about a 30 to 35 second longevity on its rotation. This particular Lightning Hammer rotation prioritizes not only using Fire Burst to might stack and DPS the enemy, but also being in water attunement when you are likely at your highest might if your party can't maintain a permanent 25 might. This rotation also uses Arcane Wave and Arcane Brilliance to keep Arcane Lightning up instead of using it as blast finishers. For equipment for a Scepter-Conjure Elementalist, I would recommend a full Berserker set of armor. While I have a set of strength runes on this particular set of armor, a full set of armor with runes of the Scholar is also very effective, especially in organized groups. In less than organized groups, or if you're the primary might stacker of the party, those extra might from the runes of strength will be very beneficial. Having those runes will enable you to maintain about 5 more might for your entire party over the course of your whole rotation. But you do this at a loss of about 7 to 10% personal DPS. On the other hand, Scholar runes will enable you to have the highest personal DPS, but you're looking at maintaining a lower might stack count for your party, so you need to rely more on your party mates to fill in the gaps. For nighttime dungeons, use a Sigil of Night and Sigil of Force. Have at least one ascended weapon in your active set of weapons so that you can maintain the highest weapon damage on your conjures. So if you need to budget a little bit, make just an ascended scepter so that you can use it with all of your Scepter-Conjure builds. For daytime dungeons, I would recommend appropriate slaying sigils with a Sigil of Force, or a Sigil of Frailty for a little bit extra vuln if you don't have an engineer in the party, with a Sigil of Force. If you want a Sigil of Strength or Battle, I would recommend a Sigil of Battle for most of these rotations because you will be swapping frequently. Additionally, a lot of these rotations don't have a high number of hits, so you won't have as many opportunities for that Sigil of Strength to proc. If you decide to stack, I would recommend a Sigil of Bloodlust. Also, make sure you put a matching sigil on your underwater weapon so that if you happen to splash through a large puddle, you won't lose your stacks. This has happened to me in a Raw Path 2 of all places, just before Alphard. For trinkets, I recommend Berserker's trinkets of the best rarity that you can afford. If you are looking at infusions, I would recommend Power Infusions for 6/6/2 builds, and Precise Infusions for 5/5 and lower air builds. The best food for a Scepter-Conjure build is seaweed salad, or the slightly cheaper asparagus and sage salad. This food works very well with a Scepter Lightning Hammer rotations, though it does not work quite as well with Frostbow since many of its skills root you. If using exclusively Frostbow, I would recommend a plate of truffle steak, or if you're in a situation where you are using Lightning Hammer but won't be able to move around to maintain the seaweed salad buff, use a bowl of butternut squash soup. If you're looking for cheaper alternatives, again I would recommend the bowls of asparagus and sage salad, Minotaur steaks, or even candied dragon rolls if you need lifesteal for a little bit of health to maintain your Scholar's buff. I would always recommend using slaying sigils as appropriate, or in dungeons where there isn't a reasonable slaying sigil, use toxic sharpening stones. If your party is not reaching 25 vulnerability, you could use Scale Venom instead though skills such as Phoenix may bounce back and apply that vulnerability or weakness to you. Scepter-Dagger and Scepter-Focus have a number of blast finishers that can be used outside of battle. Some of them require a little bit of finagling though. Dragon's Tooth, for example, usually requires a target, but if you move your camera all the way down, or all the way up, and move a little bit to lock that camera angle, then cast Dragon's Tooth, it will appear a short distance out in front of you. Note that this will sometimes get stuck on terrain either above you or below you that you cannot see because there is other terrain in the way. So just make a mental list of which angles work for which locations. In a pre-battle might stacking rotation, I would start with a Dragon's Tooth, then Firefield, Phoenix, and Earthquake. Then you can cast Turning Earth before the Firefield ends for that extra might if you need it. Usually I would skip it though because it has such a long cast time. Part of your might stacks will be going away by the time you finish that channel and get to the enemy. For Scepter-Focus, again, I would start with a camera angle that is convenient. Dragon's Tooth, Flame Wall, Phoenix, into water using the same awkward camera angle to put the comet in the flame wall, then finally Magnetic Wave. Note that in situations when you can immediately engage a boss, I would not recommend pre-stacking. Not only do you waste time on your might stacks running into battle, you also waste Scepter Burst, which can be some of the most powerful part of your rotation, out DPSing that of your lightning hammer. So in short battles, if you usually use Conjurer, I would actually suggest taking just more DPS traits, using one hammer, restacking might, and then picking up your second hammer. For your utility skills, I would recommend Arcane Brilliance as your heal for the blast finisher and for the Arcane Lightning proc. In more difficult battles, you can use Ether Renewal for the condition removal or Glyph of Elemental Harmony. I would recommend Signet of Fire, if possible, for the additional precision so that every hit of yours crits, essentially, and Arcane Wave for the additional blast finisher, as well as the second Arcane Lightning proc. Between Arcane Brilliance and Arcane Wave, you can maintain close to 100% uptime on your blasts. Finally, Conjure Lightning Hammer will be your third utility in most circumstances, though in lower level dungeons where everything has relatively low HP, you may opt for Conjure Frostbow instead. If you need a defensive utility, I would recommend swapping out either Signet of Fire or Arcane Wave for Arcane Shield, which will block 3 attacks over 5 seconds, or Armor of Earth for the protection and stability, or Lightning Flash so that you can flash away from a damaging attack. I would not recommend Mist Form in a lot of cases because that will make you drop your Lightning Hammer. If you're in a party with a ranger, or in another circumstance where you don't need Signet of Fire for additional precision, take Glyph of Storms. Cast in almost any attunement, it is damaging, and with this most recent feature patch, when cast in air, each of the strikes from the Lightning Storm, which can be up to 36, will apply 2 vulnerability, which will burst many targets up to 25 vuln within about 4 seconds. For your elite, I would often recommend Glyph of Elementalst as your DPS elite. Cast in Fire Attunement, you can get a small DPS boost for an elemental that stays in melee range. If an elemental will not survive in melee, perhaps try the Air Elemental, which attacks from range. Also, the Earth Elemental can be useful in situations when you need something to face tank hits. The Earth Elemental can pull aggro even off Berserker Guardians and other slightly more defensive builds. There are some niche uses of Tornado as well. Even though the additional stats from it have been removed, you can use it for CC on veteran and normal mobs. This can be effective, say, in the Ascalon Fractal, when engaging the warriors, or at the end of the uncategorized fractal when fighting the 4 golems. For trash runs, if I have time, I will swap out my heal for Ether Renewal for condition removal, and Signet of Air for the additional move speed. If I have even more time, or expect the trash run to be particularly difficult, I may even slot Mist Form or Lightning Flash. I usually start in Air or in Earth Attunement, and use Obsidian Flesh when I would first need to dodge. While Obsidian Flesh is channeling, I'll put on a dagger in my offhand, swap to Air Attunement, then use Ride the Lightning after that. Even though Ride the Lightning has a damage component, if you do not target anything and do not have auto-targeting on, you will not damage anything when you come out of that transform. Updraft, while it is useful as a dodge and interrupt, will now put you in combat if you use it while near an enemy. Similarly, Blinding Flash will put you in combat if you use it to prevent being hit by an attack. If I am hit by damage, or if I otherwise sustain a condition, I can use Cleansing Wave to remove that condition, or remove a condition of a nearby ally, and Water Trident for a quick heal. That's it for now for the Scepter-Conjure Elementalist. Thanks for watching!